People often ask, how do we know that the Torah is a divine book? How do we know that God is the one who authored the Torah? Why should I still keep the Torah 3,333 years after it was given, when it may have just been written by human beings? Why should I commit my life to living by these instructions if there's no proof that God is the author of the Torah? Interestingly, one of the proofs that the Torah brings, that the Talmud brings, that the Torah is a divine manuscript, that only God could have authored the Torah, no human being could have possibly written it, is found in this week's Torah portion. In addition to the many prophecies in the Torah that have all come true, and the many promises and predictions that have become true, there is absolute proof in this week's Torah portion that only God could have authored the Torah. You know, when you go to your ATM machine and you want to withdraw cash, they ask you for your PIN number. The word PIN stands for personal identification number. It's a way of verifying that you are the person on the card. Well, God also has a PIN number, and He inserted His PIN number in the Torah to verify that He is the author of the Torah. In this week's Torah portion, we find the laws of kosher. And the Torah says, in order for an animal to be kosher, it has to have two signs. It has to have split hooves and chew its cud. But then the Torah goes on to say, what's if an animal has only one of the two signs, either split hooves or chew its cud? Is it still kosher or not? And the Torah says no. If it doesn't have both, it's not kosher. One sign is not enough to render the animal kosher. And then the Torah goes on to say that there are only 4 animals in the entire world that have one of the two signs. 3 of them don't have split hooves but chew their cud: the camel, the hare, and the hyrax. And then there's one animal in the entire universe, says the Torah, that has split hooves but doesn't chew its cud, and that is the pig. The pig has split hooves but doesn't chew its cud, and therefore it's not kosher. Now the question is, there are approximately 2 million known species of different animals in the world today. If someone were to propose that the Torah was written by a human being in the desert, the first question is, why would he box himself in by saying there are only 4 animals in the world that have one of the two signs, and only one in the whole world that has split hooves and doesn't chew its cud? After all, he was living in one place at one time. He didn't have technology or science to tell him about all the different animals around the world. And furthermore, there are many new continents that would be discovered and many new species. No intelligent human being who would have supposedly written the Torah would ever say that, because that would disqualify his entire Torah, his entire book, as being a religion from God. But the most astonishing thing is that here we are over 3,000 years later. We've discovered so many new continents, and we have also discovered hundreds and thousands of new species, and never have we found any more than these 4 animals that have one of the two signs. And never have we even found a second animal that has split hooves and doesn't chew its cud. As the Torah said, there's only one such animal in the world, the pig. Only the creator of every animal in the world would have known that and had that information and been able to say it emphatically, proof positive, definitively, as the Torah declares it in this week's Torah portion. So what is God's PIN number? It's P-I-G. It's the pig. The only animal that the Torah says has split hooves and doesn't chew its cud. If someone were to ever discover a second animal, that would render the Torah false, because the Torah would have had incorrect information. Perhaps the proof, or one of the strong proofs of the validity of the Torah from God, is found in the laws of kosher, because kosher is something we do 3 times a day when we eat to remind ourselves that we're Jewish. And it's this week's Torah portion that reminds us the sacred and holy obligation of Jews to eat kosher food. As the Hebrew national advertisement says, we answer to a higher authority. 3 times a day we remind ourselves to answer to a higher authority. I once heard a beautiful story from Rabbi Esther Youngrice, of blessed memory. She said she was once on a plane. She went to speak somewhere in Texas. She was flying back, and she was sitting next to a nice Jewish young man, a single boy, a student, college-age kid. And she's talked to him about Judaism. And then they serve the lunch. She gets her kosher meal on the airplane, and he gets his ham sandwich. And she turns to him and says, "How could you eat that?" And he says, "Why can't I eat it?" She says, "Because it's not kosher." And he says, "Well, why should I keep kosher?" And she says, "Because you were at Mount Sinai when God gave the Torah to all future generations of Jewish souls, and you pledged at Mount Sinai, and you said you would keep the Torah, and the Torah says you should only eat kosher." This young man looked at the Rebbitzin and said, "Lady, you're crazy. Don't talk to me. I was at Mount Sinai 3,333 years ago. You're out of your mind. Leave me alone." And they didn't talk for the rest of the flight. When they landed, they went to get their luggage, and Rebbitzin Youngreis sees the young man getting his luggage and goes over to him. He says, "By the way, if you ever want to learn more about kosher or more about Mount Sinai and how the Jewish people stood there and what we accepted upon ourselves, you should go study Torah in yeshiva. Go to Israel. There are many good schools. Find a good school and learn more about your heritage." And with this, she left the terminal of the airport. Many years later, Rebbitzin Youngreis is in her office, and a young man wearing a kippah comes into her office. And she says, "Hi, how can I help you?" And the young man says, "Well, I just wanted to come and say thank you to you." And the Rebbitzin said, "Do I know you?" And he says, "Yes. You remember, we met on a flight from Texas to New York, and you told me about Mount Sinai. Well, after that experience, I said to myself, maybe I should learn more about what we Jews received at Mount Sinai. And I decided to take you up on your proposition. I went to Israel and studied Torah, and today I am an observant Jew." Today is the 10th day of the Omer. We are counting the 49 days to the holiday of Shavuot, which will mark the 3,333rd anniversary of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. It behooves every one of us to know our own heritage, our own lineage, our own ancestry, and our own tradition that God gave us over 3,000 years ago. What is the power of this divine document known as the Torah that has sustained us and invigorated us with passion, inspiration, guidance, and confidence as Jews, that has allowed us to outlive all of the forces that have come up against us, and has ensured that we have remained a unique, distinct light unto the nations. Although we are less than 1% of the world's population, we are renowned for our contribution to humanity. It all began at Mount Sinai. Like that young man on the airplane, we have to go and discover our gift that God gave each and every one of us as our personal inheritance. Have a wonderful day.